My name is Mary, and 3 days ago I received the most heartbreaking phone call of my life. No, it wasn't about my husband Robert's death. I already knew he was gone. This call was about something far worse. It was about discovering that the son I raised, the boy I sacrificed everything for, had just told me that his father's funeral wasn't worth his time. I'm sitting here in my kitchen right now, surrounded by 200 funeral programs scattered across this old oak table. The same table where Robert and I shared breakfast every morning for 37 years. Rain is pattering against the windows like tears I can't seem to stop shedding, and my hands are still trembling from that phone call with Johnson. You see, when someone you love dies, you expect certain things. You expect family to come together. You expect your only child to put aside whatever else is happening in their life and show up. You expect them to care. But sometimes, the people closest to you can deliver the cruelest blows of all. Let me tell you exactly what my 35-year-old son to me just 2 hours ago. I can still hear his voice, cold, matter-of-fact, like he was canceling a dentist appointment instead of abandoning his father's funeral. "Mom, I'm not coming to Dad's funeral." Those words hit me like a physical blow, but then he continued. "Ashley and I have had this Bahamas trip planned for months. The resort is non-refundable, and honestly, it's not worth changing our plans for. This. He called his father's death this. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was what he said next. "And please, don't bother me during our vacation. I need this time to decompress." Decompress. From what? I wanted to scream. From the stress of learning your father died? From the inconvenience of having to pretend you cared? I'm staring at Robert's favorite armchair right now, that old brown recliner he'd sink into every evening after working 2 jobs to pay for Johnson's law school. And I can hear Robert's voice in my memory, always defending our son's selfishness. "He'll grow out of it, Mary," Robert would say whenever Johnson disappointed us. "He's just focused on his career. Success takes sacrifice." Well, Robert was right about sacrifice. But he got one thing wrong. It wasn't Johnson making the sacrifices. It was us. It was always us. Do you know what it's like to spend decades making excuses for someone you love? To watch your husband work himself into an early grave, literally, trying to support a son who treated every gift like it was owed to him? I remember when Johnson was 7, falling off his bicycle, crying because he'd scraped his knee. Robert ran outside, picked him up, bandaged that tiny cut like he was performing surgery. I remember Robert staying up until midnight helping Johnson with his high school calculus, even though Robert had to be at work at 6 in the morning. I remember every single one of Johnson's soccer games. Robert never missed one, not even when he was working double shifts. He'd show up, still wearing his work uniform, cheering louder than any other parent. And I remember Johnson's graduation from law school when he stood up and promised us, "Mom, Dad, when I make it big, I'll take care of you both. You'll never have to worry about anything." 20 minutes after Johnson hung up on me, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door. This sweet 80-year-old woman looked more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen her. "Mary, honey," she said, hesitating with her phone in her wrinkled hands. "I don't know if I should show you this, but I think you need to see what your daughter-in-law is posting online." And there it was. Ashley's Instagram account, flooded with photos from their Bahamas vacation. Pictures of them lounging on pristine white beaches, sipping cocktails that probably cost more than most people make in a day, getting couples spa treatments, living what she captioned as their best life. But the photo that broke my heart completely? It was Johnson parasailing against a crystal blue sky, his arms spread wide, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Blessed Bahamas vibes, living our best life." While I was here, planning his father's funeral. While I was calling relatives to tell them Robert was gone. While I was trying to figure out how to pay for a burial on a teacher's pension. I've spent my entire adult life being the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over family conflicts, who made excuses, who put everyone else's feelings before my own. I was a teacher for 40 years. I believed in nurturing, in patience, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. But sitting here, surrounded by funeral programs and broken dreams, I realized something that scared me. I was angry. Not just hurt, Not just disappointed, I was furious in a way I'd never allowed myself to be before. My husband died believing his son would take care of me. Robert worked himself to death, literally, making sure Johnson had every opportunity, every advantage. And Johnson repaid that sacrifice by choosing a vacation over his father's funeral. That's when I remembered something. Before Robert went to the hospital for the last time, he'd been spending a lot of time in his study, organizing papers. He kept mentioning an envelope I should look for when the time comes. I walked into his study, a small room filled with his books, his teaching awards, photos of Johnson's childhood achievements that Robert was so proud of. And there, in the top drawer of his desk, was a manila envelope with my name written in Robert's careful handwriting. For Mary. When the time comes. Inside were legal documents I didn't recognize, bank statements, and a handwritten note that made my blood run cold. My hand started shaking as I read Robert's words, and suddenly, everything became crystal clear. It revealed a secret Robert had been keeping, the truth about our finances that Johnson had no idea about, and it gave me something I'd never had before, the power to make my son face the consequences of his choices. I wiped away my tears, and for the first time in days, I felt something other than grief. I felt determined. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd need. "Yes, I'd like to speak with an attorney," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "It's about my husband's will, and it's urgent. Because sometimes when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them. And sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons." The day of Robert's funeral, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I reserved a chair in the front row of St. Mary's Church for my son Johnson, knowing full well he wouldn't be there to fill it. But I wanted everyone to see that empty chair. I wanted them to witness the absence of the person who should have been by my side, mourning the man who gave him everything. As I walked into the church that morning, I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. Robert's colleagues from the high school where he taught for 30 years, former students who still remembered his kindness, neighbors who knew our family's story, and relatives who'd traveled from 3 states away to pay their respects. But the first thing everyone noticed wasn't me. It wasn't the beautiful flower arrangements or Robert's favorite hymns playing softly in the background. It was that empty chair in the front row, with a single white rose placed on the seat, the spot where Johnson should have been sitting. The whispers started immediately. I could hear fragments of conversations rippling through the congregation. "Where's their son? I thought Johnson was coming from Chicago. Isn't he some big-shot lawyer now?" I held my head high and took my seat next to that empty chair, feeling the weight of everyone's questions and my own broken heart. When it came time for me to speak, I walked to that podium and looked out at a sea of faces filled with love and respect for my husband. And I did what I've always done. I protected my family's dignity, even when my family didn't deserve it. Robert Chen was a man who believed in the power of love, sacrifice, and dedication, I began, my voice somehow steady despite the storm inside me. He worked 2 jobs to ensure his family never wanted for anything. He was prouder of our son Johnson's achievements than he was of his own. My voice caught slightly as I continued. "Johnson couldn't be here today, but I know his father's love will always guide him." Even as I said those words, I felt something cold settling in my chest. Because I was lying, and everyone in that church knew it. I was making excuses for Johnson one last time, just like Robert had done for 35 years. After the service, as we gathered at the cemetery, something beautiful and heartbreaking happened. Person after person approached me, sharing stories about Robert that I'd never heard. Mrs. Henderson, the principal at Robert's school, took my hands and said, "Mary, did you know your husband quietly established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students? He'd been contributing to it for 15 years, never wanting any recognition." Tom Walsh, Robert's co-worker, pulled me aside and said something that made me want to cry and scream at the same time. Robert worked overtime every weekend for 7 years straight to pay Johnson's law school tuition. He never complained, never mentioned how tired he was. He'd just say, "My boy's gonna be somebody important." 7 years of weekends. 7 years of sacrificing his rest, his hobbies, his time with me, all so Johnson could become the successful lawyer who was too busy lounging on a beach to attend his father's funeral. Back at my house, our extended family gathered in my living room, and the polite facade finally cracked. My sister Linda, Johnson's aunt, who used to babysit him every summer, was furious. "I can't believe he's not here, Mary," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Robert was more proud of that boy than anything else in this world. He used to show me Johnson's report cards like they were winning lottery tickets." My brother James, who'd driven 8 hours from Detroit, was even more direct. "I always knew that kid was ungrateful. But this is unforgivable. Robert died believing Johnson would take care of you." I listened to them express the outrage I felt but couldn't voice. They were saying everything I was thinking, everything I wanted to scream, but was too conditioned to keep peace to actually say. That evening, as family members helped clean up, my cousin Jennifer suddenly gasped while looking at her phone. Her face went pale, then red with fury. "Mary," she said quietly, "I think you need to see this." She handed me her phone, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. Ashley's Instagram account showed a series of new posts, all time-stamped during the exact hours of Robert's funeral. Pictures of her and Johnson at some exclusive beach club, cocktails in hand, clearly living their best life while I was burying my husband. But the photo that broke something inside me completely was Johnson parasailing, his arms spread wide against a crystal blue sky, with the most tone-deaf caption I'd ever seen: "Flying high while others are feeling low. Hashtag no regrets, hashtag vacation mode, hashtag blessed life." Posted at 2:47 p.m. Exactly the time I was throwing dirt on his father's coffin. Within minutes, that photo was being passed around my living room like evidence at a crime scene. My family was beyond outraged. They were calling for blood. "You have to do something about this, Mary," Linda demanded. "This is beyond disrespectful. This is cruel." "Cut him off," James said bluntly. "Robert left him everything, didn't he? Change the will. Teach him some consequences." "He needs to learn that actions have repercussions," added my sister-in-law Carol. I listened to them plot Johnson's comeuppance, and for the first time all day, I felt calm. Not because I disagreed with them, but because I realized something that surprised even me. I was already 3 steps ahead of them. "Don't worry," I said quietly, my voice carrying a tone they'd never heard from me before. "This situation will resolve itself soon enough." The room fell silent. They'd expected me to cry, to make more excuses, to defend Johnson like I always had. Instead, I was talking like someone who already had a plan in motion. Just as everyone was getting ready to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I glanced at it and felt my heart skip a beat. "Hi, Mrs. Chen. This is your son's neighbor, Patricia. I saw moving trucks at Johnson's house today. They were loading expensive items, art, jewelry, electronics. Looked urgent. Thought you should know." I stared at that message for a long moment, then quietly deleted it, without showing anyone. Moving trucks? On the day of his father's funeral? After everyone left, I went to Robert's study and opened the safe we'd installed years ago. Inside were additional documents I'd placed there after that meeting with the attorney, papers that would change Johnson's life forever. That's when my phone rang with Johnson's ringtone, the same cheerful tune I'd assigned to him when he was still the son I thought I knew. I stared at that phone, watching his name flash on the screen, and realized I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. I let it go to voicemail, then turned my phone off. Because sometimes, when someone shows you exactly who they are through their actions, the best response isn't words, it's consequences. And Johnson was about to learn that some actions can't be undone, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. 1 week after Robert's funeral, I was sitting in his favorite chair, slowly going through his belongings when my phone rang with Johnson's ringtone. This call was different. This was the call where my son's perfect world came crashing down, and where I finally found my voice after 35 years of silence. I'd been organizing Robert's things all evening, his books, his teaching awards, the little trinkets he'd collected over the years. Each item told a story of a man who gave everything to his family and asked for so little in return. When that phone started ringing, I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail like I had the night of the funeral. But something told me this call was important. Something told me this was the moment I'd been waiting for. I looked at Johnson's name flashing on my screen, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello, Johnson. The voice that came through that phone was nothing like the confident, dismissive tone I'd heard a week earlier. This Johnson sounded desperate. Mom, he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice immediately. Mom, we have a serious problem. A really serious problem. I settled deeper into Robert's chair, surrounded by his memories, and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. That's interesting, Johnson. Tell me more about this problem. The mortgage on our house hasn't been paid in 3 months, he said, his professional composure cracking with every word. The bank is threatening foreclosure. They want immediate payment of all back payments plus penalties. Or we lose the house. I thought Dad was handling the payments through that joint account you both had. I let his words hang in the air for a moment before responding. And why would you think that, Johnson? What happened next revealed everything I needed to know about the son I'd raised. Johnson launched into a panicked explanation that exposed just how entitled and oblivious he'd become. I don't understand, he said, his voice rising. Dad always said the house was taken care of. I've been paying my other expenses, the car payments, Ashley's credit cards, our vacation fund, but this mortgage was supposed to be handled by you guys. I could lose everything. Everything. He could lose everything. Not once did he ask how I was doing. Not once did he express concern about how I was managing financially as a widow. It was all about him. All about his crisis. Johnson, I said quietly, when did you last speak to your father about finances? What? Mom, that's not important right now. What's important is fixing this mortgage situation before Ashley and I lose our home. Ashley. Even in his panic, he was more worried about disappointing his wife than understanding what had happened to the man who'd sacrificed everything for him. I decided to help Johnson understand exactly what he'd lost when he chose that vacation over his father's funeral. Johnson, did you know your father took out a second mortgage on our home to help with your house payments? Silence. Did you realize he came out of retirement to work part-time at the hardware store to manage the $8,000 he was sending you every month? More silence. Were you aware that those payments were coming from a man who was already struggling with heart problems, but who worked extra hours because he was so proud of your success? When Johnson finally spoke, his response told me everything I needed to know about who my son had become. Well, if he was struggling, he should have told me, he said, anger creeping into his panic. I would have. We could have worked something out, but that doesn't solve my problem now. The bank wants $24,000 immediately. That's 3 months of back payments plus penalties. $24,000. Do you know what Robert's monthly Social Security check was? $800. Do you know how many extra hours he worked to cover Johnson's mortgage? 30 hours a week at minimum wage, standing on swollen feet, lifting heavy boxes, all while his heart was failing. I sat there in Robert's chair, looking at the photo of Johnson's college graduation on the side table, the day Robert cried with pride, and I asked the question that would change everything. Johnson, do you remember what you said to me about not bothering you during your vacation? Mom, that's not important right now, he snapped. I need you to figure out how to fix this mortgage situation. Can you take out a loan against the house? Can you borrow from your retirement? Ashley is furious. She says this reflects poorly on our financial planning, and frankly, I agree. Our financial planning. As if Johnson had been involved in any planning beyond spending the money Robert earned. That's when my voice changed. That's when 35 years of being the peacemaker, the excuse maker, the enabler came to an end. Actually, Johnson, I said, and I could hear how cold my voice had become, that's exactly what I've been doing, fixing the situation. What do you mean? I mean the payments stopped the day after you told me that attending your father's funeral wasn't worth your time. The silence on the other end of that phone was deafening. I think it's only fair, I continued, that if your father's death wasn't worth your time, then supporting your lifestyle isn't worth mine. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that for 3 months, instead of sending $8,000 to your mortgage company, I've been sending $8,000 to the Robert Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund. I'm saying that every dollar your father would have sacrificed his health to give you is now going to help students who actually appreciate education and opportunity." I could hear him breathing heavily, trying to process what I was telling him. "But you can't. You can't just stop." I didn't know. If I had known Dad was struggling, I would have. "You would have what, Johnson? Skipped one less vacation? Bought one less expensive bottle of wine? Attended his funeral?" I stood up from Robert's chair and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Robert used to spend his Sunday mornings before he started working weekends to pay for Johnson's house. "Johnson, I want you to know that your father died believing you would take care of me when he was gone. He died believing that all his sacrifices had raised a son who understood the value of family, of loyalty, of love." "Mom, please." "Oh, and Johnson," I said, cutting him off one final time, "don't bother calling me again. I'm going on a little vacation of my own, and unlike yours, mine will actually be worth my time." I hung up the phone and turned it off, just like I had the night of the funeral. But this time, I wasn't running away from a difficult conversation. This time, I was walking toward a new life, one where I finally put myself first. 3 weeks after that devastating phone call with Johnson, I woke up to the most beautiful morning I'd experienced in months. The sun was streaming through my bedroom windows, birds were singing in the garden. Robert loved so much, and for the first time since his death, I felt peaceful. But that peace would be tested in ways I never imagined, because Johnson was about to learn that some consequences can't be undone, and some lessons come with a price that changes everything. That afternoon, while I was tending to Robert's memorial rosebush, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson called me over to her fence with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mary," she said gently, "I thought you should know. There's a foreclosure sign on Johnson's house." I drove to Johnson's neighborhood, that prestigious area with manicured lawns and houses that cost more than Robert made in a lifetime. And there it was. A bold red, foreclosed sign planted right in the middle of the lawn that Johnson used to brag about to anyone who'd listen. But what broke my heart wasn't the sign. It was watching Johnson and Ashley load their remaining possessions into a U-Haul truck while neighbors stood in their driveways, whispering and staring. Johnson looked smaller somehow, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confidence completely shattered. Ashley was on her phone, pacing back and forth, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "His family completely betrayed us. We trusted them to handle the finances, and they just abandoned us. I can't believe I married into such a dysfunctional situation." Even in their lowest moment, it was everyone else's fault. Even facing the consequences of their choices, they were still the victims in their own story. The next morning, I was going through more of Robert's things when I found something that made me sit down hard in his favorite chair. It was a letter, tucked inside his favorite book, a teaching manual he'd used for 30 years. The letter was addressed to me, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. "My dearest Mary," it began in Robert's careful handwriting, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and there are things you need to know." The letter revealed everything Robert had been too kind to say while he was alive. He wrote about his growing concerns about Johnson's character, about the financial strain that was literally killing him, about his fear that their son had become someone they no longer recognized. But the line that made me cry wasn't about Johnson's failures, it was about Robert's faith in me. "Don't let him take advantage of your kindness like he has mine. You're stronger than you know. And it's time for our son to learn that love without respect isn't really love at all." Robert had seen this moment coming. Somehow, he'd known I would need permission to stop enabling our son's selfishness. Later that week, I met with my attorney, Patricia Wells, in her downtown office. What she showed me took my breath away. "Mrs. Chen," she said, spreading documents across her mahogany desk, "your husband was more prepared for this situation than you realized." Robert had been secretly documenting everything: Johnson's dismissive phone calls, his financial demands, his complete lack of gratitude. More importantly, the mortgage payments to Johnson's house had never been gifts. They were structured as a personal loan with very specific terms about respect and family obligations. Your husband was a teacher, Patricia explained. He understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. The legal documents were ironclad. Every payment Robert made came with conditions Johnson had repeatedly violated. The moment Johnson told me the funeral wasn't worth his time, every legal obligation Robert had created was null and void. 4 days later, Johnson showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, his clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Ashley sat in their car in my driveway, refusing to come to the door, her arms crossed in angry defiance. "Mom," Johnson said, and his voice cracked like it used to when he was a little boy who'd gotten in trouble. "Mom, please, I'll apologize. I'll make everything right. I was wrong about the funeral. I was wrong about everything." I looked at this man, my son, but also a stranger, and felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of calm resignation. I invited him in and made tea, treating him with the same polite kindness I'd show any visitor, because that's what he was now, a visitor in the life he'd chosen to abandon. Johnson tried everything to change my mind. First came the guilt. "I'm your only child, Mom. Family is supposed to forgive each other." Then came the anger. "This is cruel revenge. Dad wouldn't have wanted this." Finally came the bargaining. "I'll pay you back everything. I'll get a second job. I'll sell Ashley's jewelry. Just please, help us get back on our feet." I listened to it all with the patience of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching children. And then I said something that surprised us both. "Johnson, your father spent 35 years hoping you'd become the man he raised you to be. I can't spend my remaining years hoping for the same thing." I told him about the Robert Chen Memorial Scholarship Fund, about the students who would benefit from his father's sacrifice, about young people who understood the value of education and opportunity. "Your father always believed in investing in people who appreciated the gift," I said. "I've decided to follow his example." But then I showed Johnson something that made him go completely pale. It was a bank statement from Robert's account, showing a scheduled payment for the week after the funeral. "Your father was planning to pay off your entire mortgage as a surprise inheritance gift," I said quietly. $340,000. He wanted to give you complete financial freedom so you could focus on being happy. Johnson stared at that statement like it was a ghost. The payment was scheduled for September 19th, the week after his funeral. All you had to do was be there. All you had to do was show up for the man who gave you everything. Your father wanted to give you everything, Johnson. The only thing he asked for in return was your love and respect. You chose a vacation instead. I handed Johnson a single envelope, not thick with cash, not heavy with promises, just a simple white envelope. "This contains enough money for you and Ashley to start over modestly," I said. "A deposit and first month's rent for a small apartment. It's exactly the amount your father and I had when we got our first place together." Johnson opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was $2,000 and a note. "The difference is, we built our life through love, sacrifice, and gratitude. I hope you can learn to do the same." As he walked back to the car, I watched from my window as Ashley immediately started arguing with him. Probably about the amount. Probably about how it wasn't enough. They drove away arguing, just as they'd arrived. I turned away from the window and looked at Robert's photograph on the mantel. The one from our wedding day, when we were young and hopeful and believed that love could conquer anything. "I think you'd be proud of me," I whispered to that smiling young man who'd become the foundation of my entire world. Then I walked out to my garden, to the memorial rosebush I'd planted for Robert. It was blooming beautifully, red petals bright against the green leaves. I sat on the bench Robert had built with his own hands and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace with my decisions. For the first time since Robert's death, I was truly free. Free to grieve, free to heal, free to live for myself. And in that freedom, I found something unexpected. Hope for my own future, and pride in the strength I never knew I had. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who need to learn the hardest lessons. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing we can do. And sometimes, the strongest thing we can be is exactly who we are, without apology. Robert's Scholarship Fund has now helped 12 students attend college, young people who send me thank you cards, who understand that education is a gift, who remember that someone believed in their potential. Johnson and Ashley? They moved to a small apartment across town. I hear from mutual friends that Johnson has started working longer hours, that Ashley has gotten a part-time job. Maybe they're learning, maybe they're not. But that's not my responsibility anymore. My responsibility is to honor the memory of a man who loved without limit, to use the strength he saw in me, and to finally put myself first. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever enabled someone's bad behavior because you thought it was love, if you've ever sacrificed your own well-being for someone who didn't appreciate it, if you've ever needed permission to put yourself first, then please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our truth, and sometimes the most healing thing we can hear is that we're not alone in our struggles. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you deserve to be treated with love, respect, and gratitude. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Not even family.